Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Tom Puryear, and I am the current education chairperson for the State Conference of New Jersey. I welcome you. Before I go too far, I want to share with everybody that I have put into the chat the 6 scholarship winners that we have just awarded for the current 21 school year. So when you have an opportunity, please do that. And when I get finished, I'm also going to place in the chat the goals and objectives that were adopted by the state conference in February. And hopefully these will be able to be pursued in the coming months. So when you have an opportunity, please look at the goals and objectives that the state committee has approved. In the coming weeks, the State Conference Education Committee will increase our focus on the implementation of the Amistad legislation that was just recently updated. Today's Education Committee's presentation will outline what Amistad can be and is. The presentation will focus on one of our local school districts, Pleasantville, and highlight what the Pleasantville School District is doing to provide the Amistad curriculum for their students. We will have 2 presenters, Ms. Tamar LaShaw Owens, who is a member of the Pleasantville School District and is also the first vice president for the Mainland Pleasantville NAACP, and also a member of the Army National Guard. She is an Army National Guard veteran. Dr. Stephanie James Harris, who is the executive director of the Amistad curriculum, will be also making a presentation. So we have 2 individuals who will provide us with quality information about what's happening and how Amistad can be implemented and should be implemented in your school district. The State Conference Education Committee will be striving to keep you informed of our current and future activities. So without additional delay, I give you our presenters. Tamar, Stephanie.
Thank you, Tom, for turning it right on over. And again, what I'm posting in the chat at this time are just a few links in regards to what will be discussed today, to include what AmHatino stands for. And again, this is information for you in the chat, along with when there is talk about New Jersey CUSAC and what that means. So you understand what that is and where you can find it. That is also for you. And we're just waiting one moment as Dr. Stephanie James Harris makes her way.
Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, everyone. It's 12 o'clock. I'm going to begin our session. I am delighted to be able to be with the NAACP again this year and being able to present what I think is going to be a very informative and powerful session with myself and Tamar LaShaw Owens from the Pleasantville School District in regards of Amistad implementation in Pleasantville schools and a case study for how implementation does work. I have found over the years that the NAACP has been instrumental in being able to really assist Amistad Commission in understanding the pragmatics of how this legislation must be operationalized across the state, but also in regards to how community activism is key in making sure this law can be actualized. But I've also found that these education sessions in the past years have been extremely important for community stakeholders to really understand how Amistad works. I think, like all of us who want to see legislation in full due diligence, there is always a space in which we are righteously impatient and righteously upset about how we think schools should do this level of work. And so it has been sort of my job to kind of sometimes ramp up those feelings, but also in other times try to at least actualize people's understandings so that we can very strategically and specifically make sure that the work of the Amistad Commission and the way in which we are all galvanizing around the assistance for the Amistad Commission is done succinctly, and that we can all able to move in concert to create a sea change for the state that is done. And so what I think this session will do is it will allow you all to kind of walk through what needs to be done in each respective district. And Pleasantville and Tamar's assistants have been wonderful about really allowing us to come in and deconstruct really from the top down and from the bottom up Pleasantville School District, so that there was a space to really be able to reactualize social studies instruction in the full integrity and intention of the law. And I want you all to see what it looks like, because I also want you to understand how much work it requires, how community engagement, but also the dedication of teaching staff, curriculums, superintendents, board members, and the Amistad Commission all need to work in concert. But I also want you to understand what the work looks like and how curriculum maps have to be done. So, you know, there are multiple steps to see a full district implementation. It's not to discourage you, but just really to encourage you as to how it should look. And also to, I guess, have us all kind of think about what needs to happen in each district and how we can all kind of create teams to make sure this work can be done in full actualization of law. And so in talking about the Amistad Law, one of the most important things in the original Amistad Law and in the secondary changes to the Amistad Law is one particular sentence. And I know Tamar pulled it out. So if you could just go to the next slide, Tamar, I will come back to this one. But I want to make sure that they can see it. So the law, of course, is requiring that African-American history and the contributions of African-American peoples and all those that have been marginalized are included in the K through 12 and infused throughout the K through 12 curricula and curriculum maps, instructional materials, and classrooms throughout the state of New Jersey. And a lot of people, delineation as to who is responsible for what, whose wheelhouse it is I think, creates a lot of the confusion, because we have the state law that seems rather simplistic. We're asking each school board to be able to do this work. Well, just like anything with any state government or state oversight, there is a certain level of bureaucracy that also comes to not only delineate roles and responsibilities, but also sometimes confuse those that associate with the Amistad Commission and itself can be able to do certain things. And one of the most important sentences in, I think, the legislation that I think is most key, and I think has caused the most confusion, but also really gives us our first galvanizing point, is this one. And this is in the Amistad Law, both past and present, and is, for me, I think the real crutch of how we see our implementation strategies happen. Every Board of Education shall incorporate the information regarding the contributions an appropriate place in the curriculum of elementary and school students. Every Board of Education. I say that very importantly because understanding what this means it also puts it very specifically within the wheelhouse of responsibility. School boards, each respective school boards of the 687, I believe, right now in the state of New Jersey, must adopt this mandate. Why? And why has the NAACP's push to have community activism around school board adoptions been so key and it needs to continue and so instrumental? Because what we need to understand is that school board adoptions allow for it to be in the wheelhouse of that particular school district. And once a school board adoption happens, it becomes a school board mandate and a school board statute, which means it now can become a part of the evaluation process of the superintendent. You can now hold your own curriculum directors and curriculum and staff accountable. You can now evaluate it in regards of teacher evaluation. You can now make sure and guarantee in your school district level, not just the state education agency level, but the local education agency level, that it is the responsibility and must be followed through by those 9 elected or appointed members who took an oath of office that they would oversee that development. just like they would any other curriculum. And just like so it goes from being a suggestion to a mandate and to something that they must do. So this language is really, for me, I think, the beginning portions of how these relationships must work, how implementation will happen across the state, and how community activism can really assist us with doing it. Once this school board adoption happens, it actually kind of kicks in and becomes the guard, the gear to make everything else happen. In general terms, you will find that school boards, once the adoption happens, whether they do it with full knowledge of what they're adopting or not, it means that they now are, most superintendents, because it becomes a part of their oversight, will reach out, if they have not, with actually looking at what that means for their school district. And it's not just something that has to go in to their school board page and saying we made the adoption, but it actually needs to be seen in the curricula and the curriculum maps of each of the school districts, which means that they have to deconstruct and rip apart their curriculum maps and then build it in. The model curriculum that the Amistad legislation has, and Kim, if you go to the next page, and then we'll come back. This helps because I think it gives a clear sense of delineation. So our primary goals as a commission are for the assistance, for the monitoring, for the evaluation, for the recommendations, and to really guide districts in how that implementation and infusion strategy would work. If it's in respective research or scholarship, if it's in looking at curriculum map and seeing what's absent, if it's in creating materials or assisting districts in creating materials, if it's in lesson plan development or helping teachers or districts in finding the lesson plan materials, if it's in professional developments where teachers are able to learn about the history, it's in all of the ancillary things that need to help a district in putting the materials in. What the Amistad Commission cannot do, and I want to repeat this, is put it in each of the 600 school districts, because of that, in a state in which we are led by local control, can only happen in local control. New Jersey does not have statewide curricula. If New Jersey had statewide curricula, like Virginia and Tennessee and some other states that have it, then we could be able to do it, because there would be a statewide curriculum map in which each school district would be following. And thereby, if you move from Montclair or to Booton or to Cape May or to Merchantville, where I am, or Pennsauken or Cherry Hill or Verona or Summit or wherever, Washington, wherever you find yourself across the state, you were to pick up and move your child, then you would know that when you re-enroll them in their next school district, they would pretty much be in the same space. Anybody who's ever moved a child in the state of New Jersey knows that wherever you move, you might be in vastly different spaces in regards to curricula, the curriculum map, what your student is learning, and in regards of whether your student, especially if it's mid-year, can be able to pick up the paces in their new school district. Most especially because we understand, and I know the NAACP is instrumental in this understanding and making others understand the idea of educational equity and curricula and what does mean in regards to resources, and how district by district you see vast differentials and how curricula is developed and also released to children, and how children are learning and their learning goals and learning objectives, and the way in which there might be learning loss, most especially in the space in which we are in with this pandemic, or missed learning opportunities with this pandemic. So if you look at the delineation of commission roles and responsibilities, you will see that that the commission's work has really been about assisting districts, which is what we do. We spend a great deal of time assisting districts. We all come out, we'll train them on model curriculum. The model curriculum resource that has been developed by the commission as a ancillary to the textbook is to the call to the answer that New Jersey has 56, I believe, textbooks in circulation throughout the state, which is very important to note when we talk about Pleasantville, because what I do want you to even understand about Pleasantville is that I know that we've got a number of requests for people to just say, well, can we just take Pleasantville's curriculum map? And my answer is no, because unless you're using Pleasantville School District textbooks specifically with the same model and with the same year and with the same, the exact same application of textbooks with all of their instructional materials, then you're not going to be able to replicate and just pull Pleasantville's materials. Because each one of these, unfortunately, because of the way and the structure of the bureaucracy right now of New Jersey, has to be tailor-made and has to be applicable. Until and if we ever get to the space where we have universal curriculum in the state of New Jersey, which also means that each one of these evaluations and oversights for New Jersey also have to be done individually. There are some generalizations with rubrics that I might be able to assist districts with, even in their CUSAC evaluation. But the reality is that because each district's curriculum map is written specific to the district, most especially in an area where social studies or ELA is not tested, it is not a testable area. And so because it is not a testable area, what you find is that there are certain universals that I can insist on and generalizations, but a lot of them must be looked at on a case-by-case, district-by-district version where I am trying to infuse universals so that there's at least a baseline. But something like this means that there's always room for expansion. So for districts, I'm always stressing to them that this is not a never-ending story. This is not a check mark where you get to the end and you can say, now we have fully infused. Because the teaching of history is as expansive as history itself. And so there's always room for expansions, for information gathering and seeking, for information remediations, for information addendums, and for students to be engaged in the newest scholarship and research, which is why the Amistad Summer Institute has served as a space for the last 14 years for teachers to begin to continue the understanding of historic narrative, and it changes topic and subjects so that you can see what an infused curriculum looks like along the content standards for the state with a very drilled down subject area for each respective area. And each summer, we kind of review it. This summer's topic was the history beneath our feet, kind of looking at the reality of public spaces and of African-American interest, most especially across the state of New Jersey, because there is an understanding, most especially for me, that when you begin to look at the reality of African-American history and its inclusions in the K-12 curriculum for the state, and in the way in which our textbooks are oftentimes kind of drafted and written, our history only rises to its implementation if it becomes a national narrative. And so what you often find missing are local histories, local stories, and local narratives that are just as important and oftentimes can be exemplars of those national narratives. The people, places, and things that happen in New Jersey that also are representative of national themes and paradigm shifts that could be a real space for engagement for students in our classroom, because all of a sudden the history that they assume happened in other places might have happened on their streets, in their neighborhoods, in their blocks, in their towns, in their regions. And so it gave us a lot of space to enter into those conversations, and also for teachers that really had no idea, because of African-American history, because of the reality of the choices that we often make, even in regards to the engagement of the restitution and the salvaging of African-American historical spaces or places or public spheres, oftentimes in areas where we had to allocate cash or agencies had to be engaged in the work for preservation, almost disappeared. And so we spent a great deal of time kind of looking at forgotten spaces or spaces that were restored by small cohorts of very dedicated people that were trying to make sure they were alive, to really even re-engage teachers in what that meant for even whether or not students could be engaged in the work of public recovery, public understanding, and public telling for educational programming and for their respective curriculum maps, and how it could not be just maybe local, but even if I had a organization of teachers that were coming from across the state, they could each incorporate these histories into their own particular local curriculum maps. And so the narratives and the spaces of New Jersey history would be postulated and be able to be shared. So as the lessons are coming in and conversations are coming in about the local history, as they will be shared with the more than 374 teachers that were involved in the Summer Institute, they will collect and be made a collective space for information and lesson and sharing. So I've given you the globals. I will now allow us to just kind of quickly, I will give you the history of what we did with Pleasantville, and then allow Tamar to share with you for the remainder of the time the particulars in regards to Pleasantville and what it looked like. Pleasantville School District had a constituents of teachers that have been reoccurring in for Amistad Summer Institute year after year. And some people have asked me the question about whether or not we want teachers to re-engage and reapply and come back to Amistad Summer Institute. My answer is always yes, because when teachers are engaged and involved with learning, when they want to learn, when they're interested in spending a portion of their summer so that they can do lesson planning, that is not something we ever deny. And what we have learned is that teachers are not saying that they don't want to do the work. It's that they are using their textbooks, because one of the pieces of legislation that has never been passed is a requirement for African American historical content to be a benchmark for study for anyone who wants to be certified in history, the ELA, in the state of New Jersey. And so a lot of the cohort of teachers that are currently in our classrooms have never taken a course. And so the Summer Institute remedies some of that issue. We know that these materials are oftentimes only struck sort of ancillary in our classrooms, unless you are teaching an African American historical course most specifically, and then you're using an African American historical text. But the issue is that those historical texts often are not aligned with the United States history text. And so you could almost talk about the same year with those two texts, with never paralleling the information inside of the two of them. And so Pleasantville Schools has been sending teachers for the last 4 or 5 years to the Amistad Summer Institute to really drill down for there to have an understanding K through 12. Tamar LaShore Owens was very instrumental in really leading the charge with Pleasantville. And actually, after she heard about my presentation with school boards, approached her school board president at the time and asked that the school board mandate with community members was adopted. And once the adoption came, really pushed from the inside, from both community outside and local inside the school districts over the course of, I believe, almost 3 superintendents at the time. And to make sure that Amistad curriculum updates were done. Now, specifically for Pleasantville, this is not a universal for the rest of the state. Just want you to know that. Pleasantville did a tri-adoption, understanding that the demographics of Pleasantville School District also would call on their understanding a connection for all students, and understanding that the state had multiple mandates. There was a sense that rather than to continue to go back to the drawing board and for people to think that we are isolating and siloing this information, or there would be a historical hierarchy as to who would come first, second, or third, or et cetera, understanding that the Amistad legislation, in the heart of it, the crux of it, it would demarginalize the histories and that they should all be infused and included. Pleasantville adopted what became the MHATino, which is the legislation adoption of Holocaust, Latino history, and Amistad at the same time. which is what it is called and why it is reflected this way on your screen. And so the demographics of Pleasantville asked for that kind of adoption. And so the adoption across the board made this possible. Tamar at the time is a K-2 teacher. She taught second grade. And as a high school teacher and as a college professor, I was delighted that Tamar's experiences with really making sure that we could drill down for the primary grades was done, and that we could be able to translate it into the building blocks of scaffolded education that would be very instrumental in the leading into the time we began in early middle school to teach historical narratives across the line. And so she has been very good about helping me kind of make sure that there is an understanding of what it looks like in K2 so that we can scaffold up community, etc. Those early social studies skills, those early social studies standards, and what also needs to be included. So Pleasantville actually dedicated Tamar so much to the work that the last school year, she was actually taken out of the classroom for this work, because I do want you all to understand the level of work that's needed. We worked very closely together on most days when we were reviewing curricula, being able to talk about materials, being able to look at not only the state standards, but Amistad's model curricula, but also the textbook, resources that Pleasantville was using, uploading it, and almost creating for Pleasantville School District, in the spirit of universal curricula, a model or a universal that would make social studies, which is often an area that gets siloed or skipped over A through 5, into a course that could be done, whether or not it's through guided readings, ELA, whether it's through sciences or poetry or arts, but making sure with all of these multitude of resources that could be used when you're talking about centers or all kind of things, most especially for elementary school, that it could be done and that we would continuously and consistently layer the information. I'm going to turn it over to Tamar now so she can actually show you what it looks like pragmatically.
Thank you, Dr. Stephanie. And as, please, the next slide. I also want to add at this time, Dr. Stephanie was talking about the Amistad Summer Institute. And that is very key in order for the steps that I've taken to take place. So I've started attending Amistad Summer Institute in 2016. So when you're looking at 2016 all the way till now, 2021, those are 6 consecutive Amistad Summer Institutes. You saw some of the information that was posted in regards to what was available in regards to links. That didn't include the on-site visits, and that was this year. So when you're looking at 6 consecutive years, that is still not enough to be able to do the part that I'm doing. So that means that is where the Amistad Commission comes in. Every year was about implementing what I learned and what I could take back and put it into the curriculum from kindergarten, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade, K to 5. Because as you see in regards to Amistad and Holocaust law, it has to be taught K through 5. I have the LGBT and disabilities law there, so you understand that that begins in middle and high school. So when we're looking at K to 5 curriculum and the 2020 New Jersey Student Learning Standards that are updated every 5 years and how those must be implemented, that is the attention to detail that is needed so that not only are you covering the standards, Amistad and Holocaust law, because both of those have to be covered in order for a district, according to New Jersey CHUSAC, for that district to get the 4 points. You cannot teach one or the other. So again, when we're looking at Pleasantville Public Schools, we're looking at Amhatino, Amistad, Holocaust, and Latino history. Amistad history or Amistad curriculum resources that are on the Amistad Commission website also includes Native American history. So as we get into the next slide, I want to first give an example or a few examples in regards to how Pleasantville starts off every year in regards to communicating with the community, stakeholders, and parents, along with teachers, on how Amhatino is being taught, what it is. This letter that you see goes out to the community. And this is a letter from the superintendent. It is also available on Pleasantville Public Schools website under Amhatino. It is in English as well as Espanol. We have a 75 to 80% Hispanic population. And so we want to, of course, ensure that parents, we are actually catering to our community. So the letter that you do see here, again, teachers will send that out on Class Dojo. If you are a parent, grandparent, or what have you, you're kind of familiar with different apps that teachers communicate through. Class Dojo, Remind, those are two. We use in Pleasantville, K-5, Class Dojo. So because of that, we will roll that out towards the end of this year. Towards the end of this month, September. And the reason that is because at this time we are building on MAP skills. Specifically MAP skills, kindergarten through 5th grade. That is key for students to understand time. We need to take them out of 2021 and understand that when electricity was not available, phones, when we are looking at a map, and please go to the next slide, thank you. When we're looking at a map and different things, we need to understand when that was written. So that is very important. So when we're looking at timelines and charts and dates, being able for students to reflect on where that's taking place, where they are at in the world, what time frame, because maps have developed, you have certain maps for different time periods. So all of that has to be taken into as well. So it's very detailed. Looking here, as we move to the next slide, please.
And Tamara, I will just add that MAPS became sort of the entry point that we discussed this year for Pleasantville because of the Summer Institute, because of the reality that it was about place. We understood that a lot of students and teachers weren't aware of place. And so if we could give the layering of understanding for students about where place was, and so they could begin even with their lesson plan development and things on being associated with spaces and places, then we could also be able to talk about what are the primary skills on the social studies standards, which are about community and mapping skills, the cardinal signs, topography, geography, etc. Because a lot of the conversations about something even as simplistic as the Underground Railroad, as an example, becomes extremely important that students understood topography. So those kind of conversations we found a good entry space.
Thank you, Dr. Stephanie. And you see how and why we collaborate the way that we do. And also, Dr. Stephanie, the mapping actually began in 2017 at Amistad Summer Institute at Rowan. And the reason it did is because teachers, middle school and high school, we had the opportunity to collaborate. You had a person come in and bring all different types of maps in. And so we had to, as the educators, be able to look at a map, think about what time frame it is, what the pictures that are on the map, what is it saying, does it have a legend, all of that stuff. And middle and high school teachers talked about how students are coming into middle school not knowing mapping skills, just knowing, bits and periods of time periods, not being able to expound on maps and what it means and what it signifies and where it is and all of that great stuff, as you have just spoken so eloquently about. So since then, we've made sure that maps are part of not only in every chapter, but when it's talking about a specific topic, a specific person, put the map up there. if it's about Argentina, if it's about a person that, coming from Mexico or what have you, the importance of having that map so students can see, not only read about that person, but also provide that visual. And that was one thing that I learned from my colleagues that was needed more so on K-5. What you also have on the screen in front of you, and Dr. Stephanie, we're actually going to 1:10 p.m. What you have on the screen in front of you is also professional development. Why this is so important, and not only just professional development as you see in September 2nd and 3rd, but ongoing professional development. I spoke with Dr. Stephanie for over last year and talked about the need for professional development. My idea to be able to create professional development every 6 weeks, even though the curriculum K-5 was not yet all the way developed and where you see it now on the website. I did put that link in the chat. Teachers still need to kind of look at it. We need to see it before the implementation, be able to wrap our minds around the information and the content. Because if anyone ever attended Amistad Summer Institute, it's a whole lot of information. It's a whole lot, and I have to say that, it's a whole lot where you are like, your mind is blown. You're so excited. And yet at the same time, you want to share this and don't know where to begin with colleagues, how to do it. It's just like, what? How do I begin to share this? And not only that, but continue to learn about it, continue to read and review it and implement it into the classrooms. And then where and what subject and what standards are those being covered? How do I implement that or write it into the lesson plan? So all of that detail is very, very important. So when we're looking at professional development, it's not to, as Dr. Stephanie always begins opening up Amistad Summer Institute, talking about a family, talking about the support of teachers and how important we are. And this is not to put everything on you. It is to begin a process where teachers can manage the information in chunks that are attainable and that are, tolerable. It's not overwhelming, because on K-5, remember, K-5 teachers teach all subject areas except like the visual and performing arts, their art special courses in gym. But, math, reading, English, language arts, science, social studies, history, writing, everything, K-5 teachers teach, which is different from middle and high school. That means we are going from one curriculum resource tool to the next in like 30 seconds. We just have that quick transitional and we're on to the next. So when we're looking at professional development, it was broken down by grade level. And each grade level, because each grade level is different. 5th grade is different from kindergarten, different from 4th, 3rd, 2nd, and 1st. There are certain assessments that 5th graders take. There are certain skills when you're looking at, or standards, when you're looking at the 2020 New Jersey Student Learning Standards for social studies and the law that has to, students are to have at the end of a particular grade level. So when you look at those standards, it says by the end of grade 2, so kindergarten, 1st, and by the time students get to, the end of 2nd grade, these are the standards they should know. Then it goes on for 3rd, 4th, and 5th. So that means those standards don't start in 2nd grade, they start in kindergarten. And so does the information that has to be taught. So when we're talking about this gives that time for teachers to have those authentic conversations, to be able to talk about the lesson plans, how that's structured, how we're going to work it together district-wide, not school-wide, but by district. We want every student in every elementary school having the same materials, having the same opportunities. So in other words, what goes on in my classroom and what I'm utilizing is also what's going on into the 1st, 2nd, or 3rd grade classrooms that are next to me, or into the schools that are also in my district. That is very important, having that uniformity. So that is what professional development does. And ongoing professional development was, it directly involved Dr. Stephanie James Harris attending and being part of those professional developments. Number one, it gave teachers that reassurance, just like the letter from the superintendent. It takes the responsibility of teaching Amistad and puts it on where it should be. That is on, as you see, the administration, superintendent, the Board of Education. and it puts it on Amistad Commission. It is not the teacher that has to, try to explain why this has to be taught. That is why those letters go out. So this way teachers can concentrate on exactly what we do as practitioners, and that is teaching all of our children so that they are getting the skills and the information that they need. Next slide, please. When you're looking at Pleasantville Public Schools, this is the website that you see, or the page that you will see. You actually will click on 5th grade and it will give you a list of the chapters and the Amhitino letter in Spanish as well as English, the resources. All of that was, first of all, reviewed and approved by my superintendent, Dr. Chestnut Lee, and by Amistad Executive Director, Dr. Stephanie James Harris. Every single chapter, even the liberation linguistics, how is this? That has to be reviewed. It's not something that I can just put on the website. It is something that has to be reviewed. I definitely always expect that, because it's not about me. It's about the children. It's about my fellow colleagues being able to utilize that information and realize we are meeting the standards that's needed. We don't have to go here, there, and everywhere to grab resources to ensure that we are teaching Amistad curriculum, Holocaust curriculum, Latino history involved, Native American history, all of that at one time. Time is very important on the elementary level when we're looking at the subject breakdown. So teachers also during professional development, when we're looking at what you see here, and you see liberation linguistics, that is the vocabulary. Many of the textbooks that we use, the 2020 McGraw-Hill, notice that they don't have the definitions of words that are important, especially when you're looking at the curriculum. You will see that there are inserts, and I will get into that in a moment. But the vocabulary is important because it helps define what slavery, racism, discrimination. What is DACA? Okay. Oh, these are the kinds of terms that are not there. Lynching. And if a term is there, like plantation, which it is in the 4th grade textbook, the glossary, it is defined as an agricultural estate. In Pleasantville, that is not the definition of plantation. We make sure that students know that we give that example of how do you describe a farm. And we then go into what a plantation is. It must include the fact that it was forced labor by enslaved Africans, and certain terms that we utilize, like enslaved Africans, enslaved Native Americans, not to use the term Indian. Certain terms that we don't allow. Holidays we need to recognize. Understanding that everyone may not celebrate Thanksgiving. That, there are other holidays to include what Native Americans celebrate on those days. You have to be very specific and very honest. And this is why it is important that professional development is there, because all of our teachers, again, have not received or attended Amistad Summer Institute. We know that the history that we were taught was not what is in the textbooks, right? I mean, is what we're given in the textbooks is not accurately true. So we want those narratives. We need the Native American narrative, the African American narrative, the Asian American narrative, the Hispanic, narrative. Those all have to be included. And this is what this does. So notice this specific detail. So when you're looking at liberation linguistics, that is the breakdown of the vocabulary for each chapter by each section and topic. Next slide, please. In the chapters for K-5, because I can't put them all up because it would be, overwhelming. You will definitely highlight and see these. Notice the Native American map. It's in every single chapter, K-5. And it's important because it's the shape of the United States. And like my first graders would say to me is, where did they all go? We want to make sure that, and that's the opening, when they're looking at something and then asking, well, those are all those Native American nations. Where did they go? And they say Native American nations. We practice the word indigenous people. So they understand those are the terms that we use, what it looks like, how it's spelled. That's why the liberation linguistics is so important. That vocabulary is definitely a part of that. And when we do liberation linguistics, it can be integrated into language arts. Why? Because it's vocabulary. It's reading. And that's one of the things that Dr. Stephanie is this is the next step as we're going into implementation, being able to implement it as by what's mandated into other content areas, such as language arts, such as reading, such as writing, such as math. When you're looking here, you notice the maps of the slave trade. Notice this is not the map that we had in our textbooks. I see that the slave trade, you see South America. You actually see those red lines that didn't exist. Students now are seeing that the transatlantic slave trade just did not include the United States. Now we're including everyone. And that is very key. Notice the breakdown and in regards to that. Notice that we have more current information. You see the late Congressman John Lewis, and you see another type of map that is displayed. You see visual and performing African-American artists. That's part of social studies. That's very, what were the key periods and time periods? And again, what I'm talking about is also what has been highlighted and really drilled into attending Amistad Summer Institute over the last 6 years consecutively. So when you're looking at visual and performing arts, you're looking at Afro-Latino history, you see that, you see people there, you see the African-American music chart, because it's not just the fact that African-Americans just created jazz. We have to, and notice the dates that are on there. You see the dates, you see the colors, you see what genre of music influenced the other. Questions are asked about that. Students will be able to hear it. What does that sound like? What genre is that? What does it sound like? That influenced what genre? That's all part of that, because there were movements built around that. And I am, still developing that part in regards to, now we're including who? The visual and performing artists in our schools, right? When we're looking at the African-American music chart. So now the arts is very important, and that is key, so that each content area is integrating Amistad, or as we call it in Pleasantville, Amhatino. Next slide, please. The next slide is in regards to, again, just highlighting first, second, third, fourth, and fifth grade chapters all have the transatlantic slave trade map in it, where, and I've, of course, only listed, it's like 3 pages. It has all of the countries in Latin America, because one of the things on Amistad is in regards to, the next slide, slide 15. Thank you. Yep, slide 15. The next slide right after this one. It has the, when we're looking at the map and the dates of the transatlantic slave trade in those countries, United States is also included, but it's like 4 to 5 pages long. So you have, all of those countries. And right now, 5th grade and 4th grade students are just amazed on, we're now in Hispanic Heritage Month. It started September 15th. The national theme is Esperanza. And students are just like, there was slavery in Dominican Republic? Puerto Rico? They're learning this. And not only that, but I've integrated it into math. Whereas it's called Amhatino math. They actually are doing subtraction problems throughout 4th and 5th grade on exactly how many years slavery existed, what country had it first, what country, had the longest amount, of time period in regards to slavery. All that kind of information is key, because then it's now opening up those minds again, where we're realizing our community, as is always expressed in Amistad Summer Institute, our community is really, hands-on. It's not something that's so far away. But when we're able to see and understand history, we're able to connect it, and making those connections so that when they get into middle and high school, they have that background knowledge and information. They don't need to be shocked and surprised, as many of us are and continue to be, as we learn history, and more of those narratives. And Amistad Summer Institute does a wonderful job every year of shocking you in regards to things. Wow, I didn't even know that. Next slide, please. We're getting now into an example of, as Dr. Stephanie talked about, the implementation. She specifically, and the next slide is the curriculum maps. Dr. Stephanie repeated quite a few times the curriculum maps. This is key. This is the guide as we, as teachers, educators, we look at, whether it's math, science, social studies, all of that has a curriculum map. It has how long we should be on that, what standards are covered, what's the time period, what are the topics, what are the essential questions, what are the objectives, because this is how we break down our lesson plans. Latino is taught daily, weekly. So it's in our lesson plans throughout. So this is where we build and get that knowledge. Notice how detailed it is. You have the, information on the Amistad Interactive website, the link there. Other resources that are also available, the read aloud list from the Amistad Commission. You also have, when you're looking at chapter 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, those are those objectives. Notice it talks about read alouds on those countries because we teach those countries throughout the year. Notice it's spread out so that it started from September all the way to June. So it's really paying attention to that detail and giving teachers the time to instruct and time to reflect and time for our students to learn and actively be engaged. Next slide, please. The next slide also shows resources that are utilized in Untitled chapters. Here, for example, it's second grade chapter 5, slide 29. Yes, on the right is talking the book. That's the book there talking about Susan B. Anthony. But also there's an insert also talking honestly about the fact that that racism was also part of that, Latina women, Black women, Native American women were not really included. Students need to understand and learn that. And the fact that NAACP, the Crisis magazine, is an excellent resource to utilize and have as part of curriculum. It should be, because it covers a lot of different information and provides that historical information that students need. It's all about having history and that historical information and being able to utilize facts and write about facts. So they have to know facts. They have to see it in the content and in the book that is given, not separate. So when we include the history together, and that's why it's available online, because it has to be included together. So students can go to the next slide and see it and read it. And even though it may be missing information because the textbooks are, it has been added in there according to that grade level. So again, that's an example of NAACP Crisis magazine being utilized. Next slide, please. Here is another example with Nelson Mandela. In this chapter, third grade chapter 5, slide 32, they're talking about South Africa and China being a communist country, for example, in South Africa, coming from the system of apartheid and, being able to come from there. It never mentioned the Great Liberator. So, of course, the Crisis magazine had this in the 2014 edition. I made sure that was added. And not only that, it also didn't talk about slavery in the United States. We want to talk about the apartheid, but we don't want to, talk about what was going on with segregation and slavery in the United States. I made sure that was added in the following pages, but I only can show you, of course, little tidbits. So that is another example, again, of the Crisis magazine being utilized. Next slide, please. When we talk about the visual and performing arts, I use the African American Registry. And again, the NAACP Crisis magazine, it has excellent information, current actors and actresses, performers that students know about, can relate to, the shows. That already sparks their interest. They will want to read about that person. Person looks like them. Right? So all of that great stuff. And this is about the arts. This is also in every chapter we have African-American visual and performing artists. And again, using the Crisis magazine has been an excellent source. Next slide, please. When we're dealing with K through 5 and you're looking at Amistad Interactive website, it's key to be able to break down certain information for grade levels. And again, that is why it is reviewed. When I utilize Dr. Harris to see how this is written, I just send it looking for those comments and different things like that. One of the things that I learned that I'm able to implement utilizing the interactive website are the timelines. The timelines that McGraw-Hill, the book has information, but yet when you look at the Amistad Interactive website, The timeline there has even more information about what was actually happening, giving those other narratives, the Native American, African American narratives. It adds that information to the timelines. That is very key. That's the next slide, please. And so here is an example of the Amistad Interactive website, how those the timelines are integrated into 4th grade, for example, chapter 5, dealing with that time period. This is what was missing when you on the slide you saw previously. So yeah, all that information. So students can look at that, reflect on that. Assignments are created off of that. Students are able to watch videos. Amistad Interactive website also have videos and different other resources you can utilize to expound on certain periods and certain events that have taken place. So those things are put into the lesson plans. Again, that is the detail. And I'm just about through. One more slide, please. Last slide. And here we are on the another example of the timeline, and that is in regards to 5th grade, chapter 3. As you see, lesson 4, it has the timeline right next to the pages, because again, it's missing that period from 1626 to 1741. The next slide, please. We're on the, yes. Next slide. There we go. And so this way, students are able to see right next to each other how additional information that they need to know about that time period. And that is what's inputted. That's what we talk about. That is what our lessons also expand on. And I'm going to pause there. Dr. Stephanie, we have like 1 more minute, and I wanted to come back to you. And again, thank you so very much for your continued support and assistance in Pleasantville.
So I thank you. I hope that the ability to be able to both hear sort of operationally an oversight of what the law is and how we kind of assist and how we've been able to work so closely with Pleasantville and with other districts. I should say this across the board. We work just as closely with any other district that is asked for our assistance and help. What I will say to you is that Pleasantville really just opened up their doors and allowed us to really, as I said, pull apart and restart their social studies sort of curriculum and ELA curriculum, most especially at the elementary school grades. This is something that's going up by grade. So we're very specifically about understanding the scaffolding of education. And so they started from grade K, and the idea is to get up to 12, because now that they have an opportunity of seeing how the information needs to get layered and scaffolded and how all of the pieces fit together by the time we get to 9th grade. My hopes is that as we continue with implementations of lessons, we will begin to see students having a much vaster understanding by the time they get to high school. And so we won't have the learning gaps that the Commission is charged with trying to make sure that New Jersey students do not have in their understanding of the world and the contributions of African American people.
And can I just say one thing?
Sure.
I just want to thank my superintendent, Dr. Nataki Chestnut-Lee, for pushing this and making this one of her district goals. So I'm very appreciative of that.
And also, I know I have commissioners that are also members of the NAACP. I see Tom Perrier here. I know that James Harris is here at somewhere. I don't see a space right here, but Commissioner Perrier is right in the front. So I want to thank you for your continued support and for making sure that the information is translated between both organizations.